The bouquet of red roses trembled in his hand. The stems bent low so the blooms would not brush against his sleeping daughter's cheek. He stood at the front desk of the Aldrich Grand Hotel, exhaustion pressing into his shoulders like a physical weight, and watched two women behind polished marble look at him and decide, in the space of a single glance, exactly what he was worth. A worn leather jacket, 6-year-old asleep against his chest. Nothing in his appearance suggested the truth. Nothing warned them. "I'm afraid we're fully booked," the woman said, her voice smooth and utterly unmoved. "You might try the Marriott 2 blocks over." He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood there. A tired father holding roses meant for a wife who was no longer alive to receive them, absorbing a cruelty so casual it barely registered to the women delivering it. What none of them knew, what he had no reason to announce, was that he owned every marble tile beneath their feet. What happened over the next few hours would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness, humility, and second chances can change the world, please take a moment to like this video. Comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to the Aura Fables for more unforgettable stories. 11 years earlier, in a modest office in Seattle, Marcus Whitfield had signed the papers for his very first hotel property. Tired, half-forgotten building he had bought with almost everything he owned. He was, at the time, an engineer by training, a man who had spent a decade designing structural systems for skyscrapers before deciding, quietly and without ceremony, that he wanted to build something people could rest inside rather than simply admire from a distance. Hospitality, he had always believed, was not a department. It was a character trait. You could train a person to operate a reservation system. You could not train them to actually see another human being. He built slowly, carefully. By the time Sophie was born, he owned 3 properties. By the time his wife Alina was diagnosed, he owned 5. He remembered with a clarity that never dulled, no matter how many years passed. The particular cruelty of watching someone he loved disappear by degrees while the company he had built continued expanding around him, indifferent to his grief the way companies always are. Alina died on a Thursday, in early November, 3 years before the night in question, and Marcus had rearranged the architecture of his entire life around a single promise made at her bedside, that Sophie would never for one day feel unloved, unseen, or unimportant, no matter what empire he built around her. He did not run his hotels from behind a desk. He had regional managers and hotel directors and a small executive team for that. Instead, he made it a quiet, an announced habit to visit his own properties, dressed exactly as an ordinary guest. Not as a test, not as a trap, but because he had learned that the only way to understand how a place truly treated people was to be treated as one of them. That Thursday evening, he had flown in with Sophie from a work trip in Chicago. Roses purchased hastily at the airport because tomorrow marked 3 years since Elena's passing, and some traditions survive grief by sheer stubbornness. Sophie always chose the vase. It had become their small, sacred ritual. At the front desk of the Aldrich Grand stood 2 employees who had built their own quiet reputation, though not the kind that appeared in any performance review. Claire, tall and polished, wore her authority like a blazer, crisp and impenetrable. Beside her stood Renata, equally composed, equally disinclined, toward unnecessary effort. Neither woman was cruel by nature. Exactly. They were simply the product of a culture that rewarded the appearance of control over the substance of care, a hotel that had quietly stopped noticing the difference between the two. And moving past them that evening with an armful of fresh linens was Dolores, 50 years old. Silver threading through dark hair, pulled back simply beneath the burgundy vest of the housekeeping staff. She had raised 3 children alone after her own husband passed, and she had learned long ago that the world rarely rewards the people who notice small things. She kept noticing anyway. It was simply who she was. "I have a reservation," Marcus said quietly, careful not to wake Sophie. "Whitfield. Just checking in for the night." Claire's eyes moved over the screen, then back to him, taking in the leather jacket. The sleeping child, the slightly crushed roses, arriving at a conclusion before he had finished speaking. "I'm not seeing anything under that name," she said. "And even if there were an issue, we're fully booked this evening. There's a corporate event upstairs." "It may have been booked through corporate," Marcus said gently. "Could you check again?" There was a pause. The particular pause of someone deciding how much effort a stranger deserves before they have even finished the sentence. I'm afraid there's simply nothing we can do, Claire said, in a tone that did not sound sorry at all. You might try the Marriott 2 blocks over, Renata added, not unkindly in tone, but carelessly in effect. This time of year, walk-ins just don't work out. I'd recommend calling ahead next time. Marcus stood there, Sophie's small weight settling deeper into sleep against his shoulder. He was not angry. He had learned long before he owned a single building that you could measure a person's character far more accurately by how they treated someone who appeared to need nothing from them than by how they treated someone who clearly held power. Is there a manager I could speak with? He's occupied with the event upstairs, Claire said. I really can't interrupt him over a room question. As I said, we're full. The two women exchanged a glance, nothing spoken, but understood. The way small unkindnesses often travel between people without needing language at all. And Marcus, exhausted, grieving, holding the last flowers he would ever buy for an anniversary his wife could not celebrate, simply stood in the lobby of a building he had built with his own hands and waited to be seen. It was Dolores who noticed first. She set her linens down on a nearby cart and approached, not the desk, but Marcus directly. Excuse me, she said gently. Is everything all right? I have a reservation that doesn't seem to be coming up, he said. I'm told the hotel is full. She glanced toward the screen. Did you check the corporate block? She asked Claire. Reservations from the executive office don't always show in the standard search. You have to look under the secondary tab. I checked the system, Claire said, irritation flickering beneath the surface. There's nothing. Did you check the secondary tab? Dolores asked again, the gentleness in her voice acquiring a clear edge beneath it. Claire clicked through the screen with visible reluctance. Her expression changed. There's a reservation here, Whitfield. Under the executive booking category, I thought there might be, Dolores said simply. She turned then and looked at Marcus fully, the way she looked at every person who walked through those doors, whether or not anyone had trained her to. She saw the roses. Those are beautiful, she said softly. Is tomorrow a special day? It's the anniversary of my wife, Marcus said quietly. She passed 3 years ago tomorrow. We always put flowers out. My daughter picks the vase. Dolores's expression softened in a way that had nothing to do with policy. Let me find you a vase before you go up, she said. Shouldn't have to carry these bent all the way to your room. She reached out, gently straightening a stem that had bent during the flight. The way a person fixes something small simply because they are the kind of person who cannot walk past something broken without mending it. Something settled in Marcus's chest that had not settled since walking through the revolving doors. Someone had finally seen him. Not the reservation, not the inconvenience, but him, tired, grieving, holding roses meant for someone who would never receive them again. He checked in. The suite, once located, had been booked weeks earlier through his own corporate office. But before going upstairs, he asked to see the general manager, not in anger, but because patterns of behavior were always worth understanding before they were corrected. Gregory Sandoval arrived within minutes, and the color drained from his face the instant he recognized the name on the registration screen. Mr. Whitfield, he said, I had no idea you were. I'm terribly sorry for the confusion at the desk. I'd like to talk to you about what happened, Marcus said calmly. Not as your employer, just as a guest who was treated unkindly tonight for no reason other than how I happened to look when I walked in. He told Gregory plainly what had occurred. And then he told him about Dolores, about the vase, about a kindness that had cost her nothing and had meant in that tired moment almost everything. 2 days later, Marcus found Dolores in the small break room behind housekeeping, eating a sandwich during her lunch. She rose immediately, startled, smoothing her vest. Please sit, he said. I wanted to thank you properly. It was nothing, she said, faintly embarrassed the way kind people often are when their kindness is named aloud. I just don't like seeing people treated that way. I raised 3 kids alone after my husband passed. I know what that kind of tired looks like. I didn't know that, Marcus said. Not many people ask, she replied, without bitterness. He looked at her steadily. I'm restructuring our regional training program, the one that teaches new hires what hospitality actually means, beyond the script. I think you'd be better at it than anyone currently doing the job. I clean rooms. Mr. Whitfield, I'm not a trainer? You saw a tired man, a sleeping child, and a bent flower stem, he said. And you fixed all 3 without being asked, in under 2 minutes, while 2 trained employees stood 3 feet away and saw nothing at all.
Ow.
That isn't a small skill, Dolores. That's the entire skill. Claire and Renata were let go the following week, not in anger, but after a careful review confirmed what Marcus had already suspected, that the evening had not been an isolated lapse, but a pattern quietly absorbed and forgotten by a hotel that had stopped noticing the difference between competence and character. Dolores accepted the new position after several days of careful thought and one firm phone call from her oldest daughter, who told her in no uncertain terms she would be a fool to refuse. Within the year, she became the regional training coordinator for guest experience across all 7 of Marcus's properties, a role built entirely around what she had already been doing quietly without title or recognition for years. On her office wall, she kept a small framed photograph, not of the hotel, not of any award, but of a simple glass vase holding a bouquet of slightly crushed red roses, sent to her the week after the anniversary had passed, with a card that read only, "Thank you for seeing us when it would have been so easy not to." Sophie, in time, would ask her father why that particular night stayed with him so clearly out of so many nights of travel. And Marcus would tell her that it was the night he had been reminded of something he already believed but had needed to relearn, that kindness rarely announces itself with fanfare. It comes quietly in someone noticing a bent stem, a tired set of shoulders, a sleeping child who deserves a bed rather than a lobby chair. True greatness, he would say, is never measured by titles. It is measured by character, by the small, unwatched choices a person makes when they believe no one of consequence is looking. And every person we pass, however ordinary they appear, is carrying some invisible battle we will never fully see, unless, like Dolores, we choose to look a little closer.